Good grief, said Jotaro Kujo, as he, his grandfather Joseph Joestar, and the rest of their allied group of stand users hid from the light of day in the shadows of a ruined building. Outside, amorphous semi-humanoid monstrosities roam free in search of life. How could this have happened? Jotaro's family had been on some bizarre adventures, but this one was proving to be the most bizarre of all. The sun, now designated SCP-001, was burning with intense bright red light and an anomalous level of heat. It beat down on the world below like an evil and sadistic god of the desert. The entire world was at the mercy of these oppressive solar rays, and high temperatures were just the beginning. From the looks of it, any living thing exposed to the rays of SCP-001 would quickly dissolve into a horrible gooey substance that would ooze towards other organisms in an attempt to absorb them into its biomass. Basically, it was like a zombie apocalypse straight out of an easy-bake oven. The Stardust Crusaders had been passing through this city on their globe-trotting adventure, only to find that morning had brought with it a disaster the likes of which had never been seen before. By mid-afternoon, when the sun was highest in the sky, most of the people had already been converted into slime monsters, and those who fled into the shadows found themselves relentlessly hunted down and absorbed. Only the stand users of Jotaro's group, who were already on the lookout for strange happenings, had been clever enough to pick up on the situation immediately. They had been the subject of many unusual supernatural attacks over the course of their journey, so the initial anomalous effects of SCP-001 seemed to be another routine brush with an enemy. "Hey, Jotaro! This has to be the effect of an enemy stand, right?" Joseph said. "What? Are you stupid or something, old man?" spat Jean-Pierre Polnareff. The Frenchman was ever the impulsive one, and he always found something to complain about when a woman wasn't present. He was selectively polite, one might say. It was fitting given the fact that his stand, Silver Chariot, took the form of a sword-wielding knight, and its reaction speed was the fastest of any of the Stardust Crusaders. "You think one stand could do all this?" Polnareff was adamant about making his point. Jotaro's fellow high school classmate, Noriaki Kakyoin, was the next to speak. "Polnareff, keep your voice down. We can't be sure it's not a stand, but either way, those flesh monsters are looking for us." Kakyoin was younger than Polnareff, but tended to carry himself with more composure. This likely had something to do with the fact that Hierophant Green was the group's most technical stand, and often used for reconnaissance. "What do you think, Avdol?" Kakyoin continued. "You're the expert here." Muhammad Avdol, a fortune teller who possessed a stand that controls fire, Magician's Red, was often knowledgeable about the supernatural. "A stand this powerful would have to be limited in the range it could affect," Avdol said. "What we have to do is get further away from this area. Then we'll see if this strange sunlight fades." "But what if the user is following us?" Joseph interjected. "How will we know we aren't putting more people at risk?" "Mr. Joestar, we can't win this battle without more information," Avdol replied. "Kakyoin, your Hierophant Green has the longest range. Send it to scout for a place outside of the stand's reach. Our stand shouldn't be visible to those transformed humans, and the heat from the sunlight won't affect something without mass." Friendly reminder to those of you at home unfamiliar with the properties of stands. Stands are spectral entities formed from the soul of the user, and are essentially superpowered ghosts without physical presence. As such, they won't be affected by SCP-001 the way a living thing would. Now back to this bizarre adventure. "Right," Kakyoin nodded. "Hierophant Green!" Kakyoin summoned his stand and began threading Hierophant Green's long, stretchy body throughout the ruins as far as it could go. The young man concentrated, looking through the eyes of his stand. As Kakyoin and his stand searched for the end of the anomalous effects of SCP-001, Polnareff continued to complain as usual. "So, we're still not sure what's going on, but from what I've heard, you're already calling it a stand? Did I get that right, Avdol?" Polnareff grumbled. "Do you have any better ideas, Polnareff?" Avdol said sternly.
"Iggy!"
barked Iggy, the last member of the Stardust Crusaders. He was a Boston Terrier who commanded a sand-manipulating stand known as the Fool. Iggy didn't really have much to add to the conversation, but he liked to be heard.
"Listen," said Joseph Joestar. "When I was a younger man, I actually did go head-to-head with some terrifying beings who might be able to turn people into monsters like these. But every single time, the sun was the enemy of those guys."
"Nobody is interested in hearing your stories right now, old man," Jotaro chided his grandfather. Meanwhile, far from where the Stardust Crusaders were hiding out, Hierophant Green was reaching the limits of its effective range and seeing no sign of an end to the anomalous effects. Kakyoin was baffled. Could it be true that the entire world had been affected by the frightening ability of the sun, now that it was SCP-001? If that was true, then the apocalyptic wasteland was more than just the work of an enemy stand user. This would mean that the sun itself had become the enemy of all life. Kakyoin wondered about his family back in Japan. Would they manage to survive this terrible catastrophe? He couldn't help but hope that there was some way out of this utter devastation, even though the information gathered by his stand told him otherwise. Kakyoin withdrew Hierophant Green and brought his companions up to speed. However hard it was to accept, the world as they knew it was gone with the daybreak. Polnareff was beside himself in sadness, while Avdol and Joseph exchanged a meaningful glance. For once, Iggy's bad attitude subsided, and the dogs simply whispered. Only Jotaro remained determined to carry on. "Good grief, would you all get a hold of yourselves?" Jotaro said. "We'll remain human as long as we aren't caught in that light, so I'll use Star Platinum to tunnel our way underground." Jotaro's Star Platinum was a short-range stand, but in terms of raw power, it was off the charts. Its punches could easily tunnel through solid rock and create a subterranean passageway for the Crusaders to retreat to a safer area. "Attaboy, Jotaro!" Joseph exclaimed. "We'll make our daring escape mole-style!" Jotaro nodded and called Star Platinum, shouting its signature battle cry of "Ora Ora!" Star Platinum smashed through the earth below, instantly creating the entrance to a tunnel. At that exact moment, every flesh monster in the nearby vicinity turned its attention towards the sound. The stand users had to move quickly, because they would soon be completely surrounded. "Oh my god!" shouted Joseph in his usual way, as a couple of flesh monsters began to enter the ruined building. Luckily, Polnareff and Avdol sprung into action and summoned Silver Chariot and Magician's Red to fend off the flesh zombies. Silver Chariot delivered an inescapably fast fury of sword strikes to one of the monsters, while Magician's Red burned them away with its supernatural flames. The two men high-fived at a job well done. Just then, the wall next to them burst open, revealing a new monster and caused the sun's rays to enter into the building's interior. With split-second intuition, Avdol pushed Polnareff further into the shadows. The Frenchman tumbled backwards into the hole Jotaro made, and before he could get his bearings, he caught a glimpse of Avdol being absorbed into the monster's mass. "Avdol!" he cried out, but it was too late. Avdol was already starting to show signs of transformation into an ooze-like zombie himself. The fortune teller breathed in deep and called the name of his stand with determined fervor. "Magician's Red!" Before Avdol could be fully taken by the slime, he unleashed the totality of his firepower on every zombified lifeform within range, its destructive heat enhanced by the dryness of the atmosphere. Avdol turned back to his friends and gave them a heartfelt thumbs up before he disappeared into the flames. Polnareff cried out for his friend again with tears in his eyes, but Kakyoin and Joseph grabbed him and made their way deeper into the tunnel. As badass and heroic as it was, Avdol's sacrifice wouldn't keep those hordes of monsters at bay for long. While Kakyoin and Joseph dragged a crying Polnareff through the underground escape route, Jotaro and Iggy were already at the front of the group, using a combination of Star Platinum's digging ability and Iggy's sand manipulation to stabilize the tunnel. The Stardust Crusaders were deep beneath the surface of the earth now, so a cave-in could be a real problem. "We have to go back!" Polnareff shrieked. "Avdol needs our help!" "It's too late, Polnareff," Joseph said with grim conviction. "Avdol is gone." We don't know that for sure," Polnareff carried on. "Let me go!" But Kakyoin and Joseph held on to Polnareff tightly and continued to drag him down the passageway, hoping not to lose him to this daytime nightmare as well. On the inside, Jotaro was shaken by the loss of one of his companions, but nobody would have been able to tell by looking at his stoic exterior. He was solely focused on keeping the tunnel expanding, so that he and the remaining Crusaders could survive this ordeal together. Suddenly, a noise from the opposite end of the passageway put the group on high alert. Like a flood of liquefied horror, the flesh monsters had begun pouring themselves into the pit and were now moving towards the group, inch by inch. "Oh no!" Joseph shouted. He loosened his grip on Polnareff, and both of them immediately booked it towards Jotaro and Iggy. Kakyoin, however, stood in place and braced himself. He didn't like it, but he knew what he had to do. Right now, his stand had the ability to stop these things, but first he had to slow them down. "Emerald Splash!" Kakyoin shouted, prompting Hierophant Green to launch a stream of concussive green gemstones from its hands. As planned, the attack slowed the slime monsters down. Kakyoin was then able to put the second part of his plan into effect. He identified what appeared to be a face on the monster in front and sent Hierophant Green to make its way inside the creature's body. This was his stand's most terrifying ability, and one Kakyoin seldom used. Hierophant Green had the power to control the bodies of other physical entities from within. Once his stand had established control, Kakyoin forced the massive ooze to stop in place, instantly plugging the tunnel and preventing the rest of the monsters from getting any closer. How long could he keep this up? He didn't know. But because of Hierophant Green's properties as a remote stand, Kakyoin was able to run and rejoin Jotaro and the others at the front of the tunnel. The tether between himself and his stand was stretching farther by the minute, but he dared not let his control of the oozing entity slip, lest he and his companions suffer the same fate as Avdol. Before long, Jotaro felt a different sort of surface at the front of the tunnel. Rather than earth, it was brick. With one punch from Star Platinum, he smashed through and into what appeared to be an abandoned subway station. The power was still on, though most of the lights had faded. It was fortunate that there was no natural sunlight in this place. As everyone's eyes adjusted to the light, the stand users crossed the tracks and made their way onto the somewhat safer area. Polnareff drifted over to the magazine kiosk, searching for signs of anyone behind the counter. There was nobody here, and Iggy soon helped himself to some of the coffee-flavored chewing gum at the concession stand. The dog couldn't resist his favorite snack after all. Jotaro stood by the tracks as if waiting for a train, while Kakyoin did his best to maintain his hold on the monsters further behind them in the tunnel. With a bit of searching, Joseph found a large portable music player designed for CDs, also known as a boombox. With the use of his divination-focused stand, Hermit Purple, Joseph created purple thorny vines which weaved their way into the wires of the device and generated a psychic message. Hermit Purple could usually be counted on to provide more detail about a situation, but its powers were limited by the device used to gain the information. In this case, the CD within the boombox had a copy of the Beatles' famous 1969 album Abbey Road, so Hermit Purple's message to Joseph came out as a garbled but oddly appropriate rearrangement of the lyrics to Here Comes the Sun. Little darling, I see their faces slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been alright. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say, I feel I've been slowly melting. Sun, 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 here it comes. Oh my God, Joseph said to himself quietly. Just then, Kakyoin felt the body that Hierophant Green was controlling give way. Apparently the pressure of so many other ooze monsters had been too much for it to hold back, and now these things were barreling down the tunnel towards the Crusaders. Rather than pulling Hierophant Green back completely, Kakyoin unleashed his Emerald Splash over and over again in an attempt to force a cave-in, but the creatures were too resilient, and their ooze-like structures meant they could squeeze past mere rocks in their path. Kakyoin told the rest of the group that it was time to leave, and as if on cue, a train began to pull into the station. Unfortunately, the crazy train pulled into the station with several cars full of ooze zombies ready to grab the poor team and drag them into the sun. There was no way out but up the stairs, back into the sunlight they had done everything possible to escape from. As Polnareff, Jotaro, Joseph, and Iggy did their best to fend off the attacking creatures using their stands, Kakyoin made one last-ditch attempt to contain the monsters. He stretched Hierophant Green down to its most basic form, a series of long, green, fibrous strings, and created a net to ensnare the creatures. While the oozes could still seep its way through its wiry form, Kakyoin rigged his stand to set off an emerald splash on every bit of anomalous goo that made it past the net's defenses. It was a sustainable and effective wall against the monsters, using both the tensile strength of the stand and its energy attacks to effectively stymie their progress. There was only one problem. In order to maintain this perfect defense, Kakyoin would have to stay behind. "I'll hold them!" Go on without me, Kakyoin said.
Kakyoin!
Joseph shouted, as the rest of them ran as fast as they could out of the subway. Having effectively lost 2 members of the group, the Stardust Crusaders were low in spirits. Looking up through the subway exit, they could see that they would soon be in contact with the sunlight, meaning that even their survival would become unlikely. But Jotaro wasn't about to give in. He grabbed Iggy and held the dog out in front of him.
All right, Iggy, it's now or never. Either show us you can be a team player or be the first to turn into one of those blob monsters.
Iggy struggled in Jotaro's grip, but to no avail. The dog knew that Jotaro was serious, so in an act of self-preservation that was unusually generous of him, Iggy used the Fool to stir up the sand on the ground above into a gigantic shady sand dome. Moments later, he compressed it into a compact fortress of sand, Iggy's moving castle, as it were. No light could enter this fortress, but because of the granular nature of sand, oxygen was flowing freely. The Stardust Crusaders now had a method of travel in this world torn apart by SCP-001. Of course, there was still the matter of dealing with the flesh creatures outside. Even if the fortress of sand could move across the surface without sunlight getting in, the surrounding oozes could still impede its progress. With the help of all 3 of Jotaro, Joseph, and Polnareff's stands, a solution soon became clear. Joseph would use Hermit Purple on the sand to divine the location of any approaching threats, while Jotaro and Polnareff would patrol the outside of the miniaturized fortress with Star Platinum and Silver Chariot, respectively. That way, whenever a flesh creature got too close, the 2 attack-type stands could unleash full-force barrages to knock them away. The next thing to do was for Iggy to increase the speed of the sand construct by adding wheels to it. It was like a gigantic sand monster truck zooming through the ruins, with a platinum brawler and a silver knight repelling anything that came too near. Once Iggy gained enough velocity with the Fool, Joseph used Hermit Purple to discern the location of a bit of rubble shaped conveniently like a ramp. The sandcastle vaulted off the ramp and into the air, while Iggy augmented his creation once again with a pair of gigantic gliding wings. Now, they were soaring. Out of the reach of the flesh monsters, Joseph and Polnareff shared sympathies over the loss of their 2 important friends. Avdol and Kakyoin had both bravely given themselves to protect the team, and none of the Crusaders would be here if it wasn't for them. Jotaro focused on helping Iggy pilot the sand glider, using Star Platinum to kick the ground whenever the vehicle got too low. Nobody was sure what they would encounter next in the daybreak, or what bizarre adventures were yet to unfold, but they had each other, and for now, that was enough. Now go check out I Survived 100 Days of SCP-001 When Day Breaks, Here's What Happened, and SCP-001 When Day Breaks Tale Hour by Hour for more horrifying When Day Breaks action.